to hear from professionals who are usually in the division that I come from. So really excited for you to be here. My area of focus is equity-centered, MTSS, PBIS, restorative justice practices, social emotional learning, and social work services.
Hi there, my name is Melissa Spaden. I am also Director System of Supports on the Learning and Leadership Services side of the house. And I work a lot on implementation and improvement science, assessment, data literacy, research, policy, and the ever-present LCAP.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Luis Lopez. I'm the Equity and Culture TOSA with the focus on social emotional learning in the Sweetwater Union High School District.
So for several weeks now, or every week, we've been doing what's called a land acknowledgement. And I thought it would be helpful to talk about why we even do this. And land acknowledgements are popping up all across the nation, and it is a way to really honor and pay respects to the indigenous folks who are on this land. And what's super important about a land acknowledgement is that in many cities, counties, and states, the land that is now occupied by colleges, universities, schools, museums was never legally seceded, which means that it was never, there was never a transfer of land legally between the government and the indigenous folks. So a land acknowledgement in and of itself is just that, an acknowledgement, and it's a way to honor those indigenous folks who were here. So as we know, here in San Diego County, it is the Kumeyaay people. So we'll start off today with this land acknowledgement. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together here today. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. Today, we gather on the ancestral lands that carry the footsteps of the Kumeyaay people. The Kumeyaay people have stewarded this land for centuries, and this land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. Today, the Kumeyaay peoples are present in 13 bands located on reservations throughout San Diego County. We pay respects to their elders past and present. We acknowledge this legacy. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay. So our session outcomes for today are to reflect on the importance of a caring adult for every student. Examine the role of school-based mental health professionals in implementation of school-wide SEL, and understand the interrelation and integration of wellness practices and supports. So as we think about that caring adult, I would like for all of us, as our welcoming activity, to think for a few moments on the caring adult in our school who made the most impact on us. So just take a few moments, few seconds, and think about your school days, and think about a caring adult, anyone that really made an impact on you that you can still recall today. And we're going to put those in the chat. And this is also a way of bringing this person, some are with us still and some have passed on, but it's a way of bringing that person into the room, bringing that energy into the room and what was significant about them in your life into this training today. So on the count of 3, if everyone would hit send, we will be able to see a waterfall of folks who have cared for you. So on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, hit. Wow. Thank you for those of you who were able to put why, powerful. And I love the fact that it ranges from elementary school, middle school to high school. So with that, think about your own system or your own school. And what are the key features of learning environments that make students, especially those farthest from opportunity? So we're talking students are historically underserved, um, racially marginalized. What are the key features so that all students feel safe and supported? And number two, how can educators create spaces where students feel comfortable making mistakes in SEL and learning from those mistakes? So those are just some questions to carry with you throughout today's workshop.
I wanted to bring us back to those indicators for school-wide SEL, and this is a Castle resource, and when you get the slides afterwards, this is linked within there. It's basically a document that has these listed with a little more explanation. But when we're looking at school-wide SEL, we've talked about most of these factors so far. So we've talked about explicit SEL instruction. We did a whole series about academic integration for those first two. Youth voice and engagement, which we discussed, the importance of putting youth voice first and having authentic youth voice. So we have all those resources. Looking at supportive school and classroom climates, which we're going to talk about next week in more detail. We focused on adult SEL quite a bit in our first three-part series. Supportive discipline, which we'll also talk about next week, and a continuum of integrated supports. The authentic family partnerships between the school, the home, and really making clear what SEL is and what it should look like. And then aligned community partnerships and systems for continuous improvement. So today we're going to touch upon a lot of these different pieces and how your school-based mental health professionals can help support that work. And as we've gone through this whole process, especially in school-wide SEL, we've talked a bit about the stages of implementation and why implementation science and really preparing for implementation, which is apparently a very difficult word for me today, is so important, because we talk a lot about, how do we win people over? How do we get people on board for a new initiative? And instead, we need to create a really strong offense and explain why this is so important, why this is such an important initiative or really an important part of our MTSS system to focus on and deepen our learning. And so if you click one more time, Luis, these red arrows, these are all of the places where your school-based mental health professionals should be not only part of the conversation, but an integral part of your team. So that implementation team that's using data, implementing those coaching supports, so providing those intentional supports to teachers and other staff at the school, continuing the training and professional learning that occurs, data and feedback from multiple sources, having a process to develop implementation strategies, looking at feedback loops. The feedback loops are really important between the students, the parents, the teachers. And then that last part, using decision-making criteria for expanding use of this practice. So if you are working with a small group of teachers to start with, piloting your SEL work, or thinking about, a small group of students or a specific student group to focus on, this is where some of that work becomes really important to make sure that your school-based mental health professionals are not just part of the team, but they're helping lead that conversation. So as we go into our part about school-based mental health professionals, we want to think about how adults are learning about SEL at the school, how they have opportunities to interact with what SEL really is, what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it should be. And this is all adults in the system. So we showed the video last week where it was every single adult that a student could interact with during the school day, from getting on the bus, in the cafeteria, in the hallway, no matter where they are. And so when you're thinking about how to implement school-based SEL, this is every adult in the system. It's not just classroom teachers. It's not just pulling out students to have individual meetings with your school-based mental health professionals. This is every single adult understanding how this would work. And so one thing that we want you to think about is, how can adults learn and connect at your school site? Do you have a mechanism for professional development that's not just core content teachers? Because as a extracurricular or a specialized teacher, I taught theater, and theater teachers are often left out of the conversation. They are your strongest supporters of SEL, so make sure that they're part of that as well. So as we transition to their part of the presentation, We just wanted to do a quick poll to find out what types of school-based mental health professionals you have at your school. And Luis, I think we're ready for Tanya to take over. Okay, so we have a good amount of school psychologists. About 50% of us have school counselors, and one of us has a school social worker of our current respondents. Okay, give me a few more seconds. All right, thanks everyone. Anna and Tanya, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having us here today to share what school-based mental health professionals are. I know it's a fancy title for the work of school counselors, school social workers, and school psychologists, but it's actually a term that was put together and shared in the fall. And it was a combination of those three professional organizations coming together to talk about our work and how we could work more collaboratively together. Because what was happening was when COVID hit, a lot of people were reaching for whatever support they could find and often reached out to community-based professionals to support students through some of the mental health needs. When actually right on many of your campuses, you already have people that can do that work. So we're here today, I'm here with Anna to share with you some of the things that a school counselor and a school social worker and a school psychologist can do, some of the roles that you may not even be aware of. So I do want to start out with this video. You may have seen it already, but I think it does kind of set the tone for the conversation we have today. So that video is so powerful. Every time I see it, it evokes some kind of emotion. It could be because I had recently talked to a student in a situation that was relatable to what I saw on the screen, or it reminded me of, a teacher who shared with me something that was happening in their own personal lives. What we find on a school campus is that there are so many people, and oftentimes people get missed, or they're not seen, or they're not heard. They haven't found that one person that they can trust. And the quote that I have up here is, what we see often is only a fractional part of what it really is. It's unknown. And you see that iceberg illustration where what you see on the surface may be something completely different than what's happening underneath. And I know that this video was shot pre-COVID-19. And so I did put up an infographic of what teens might be witnessing or seeing because of COVID-19 and what they might be experiencing. So you can see above the iceberg, they could have more screen time, defiance, swearing, complaining, sneaking, but what they may be experiencing underneath the surface are some of the things that you see on the screen. So it's being aware and cognitive that this is happening. And as students are returning back to the campus, how are we meeting them where they're at? And how are we assessing their needs? And who is assessing their needs? So the question I have, and we're gonna do what's called a Slido, and you can either point your camera phone at the screen and the survey will pop up, or you can join at slido.com and there's a place for you to put in the code, which is 413740. And if you could go ahead and access that. And then I'm going to go over into real time. And there again is the QR code as well as the slido.com with the number. But I should start to see those come up. Okay. So who at your school do you refer or reach out to assist students on campus with their mental health needs? And it looks like it keeps changing. So it could be depending on who is at your campus, who you might have a better relationship with, who you might know the student might have a relationship with. Could be the setup of your school where you don't have anybody, so you have a community-based agency on campus. So great, it looks like we've got the highest being school counselor, school psychologist, an administrator, school nurse. So all of these roles are equally important, just as long as we know who to reach out to and who to access. Okay. So I do want to share that when my son was in 2nd grade, he actually just turned 22 yesterday, so this is a while ago, but he was on the playground playing, and there was a student who was 2 years older than him that was following him around, calling him names, and it always happened at recess since he didn't have him in a class. And he would come home and say, "Mom, there's a kid that's bullying me." And, my first reaction is, well, have you talked to your teacher? Have you shared this with anyone? He's like, "No, I haven't, but it just really, really bothers me." And of course, with the counseling that came out of me, like there's something probably going on for where this student is acting out. But we wanted to wait over time and see if it would just kind of go away or if it would continue. Well, it continued, and my son started to not feel safe on the playground. So I reached out to his teacher, who said, okay, we'll kind of watch things when recess happens. But they still didn't really pay attention or take notice of it. So I reached out to the principal because the school didn't have a school psychologist or a school counselor or a school social worker. So the principal was the one who kind of wore all those hats. When I reached out to her, she really, appreciated the fact that I was checking in, and she said, "I know which student you're talking about." And she said, "Because I know that you're a school counselor, I do want to share something in confidence with you." Because my email wasn't mad, it wasn't upset. I just said, "Hey, I just want to bring this to your attention that my son doesn't feel safe." She shared with me that the little boy had just his mother had just passed away from a terminal illness. And the principal was saying how he was starting to act out, how his dad was really struggling with 3 young children in the house, and that as the principal, she was there and told the parents that I will make sure to watch out for your son and keep him safe. And it was because of that that he was acting out and he was attaching himself and having behavioral issues. They were what were above the surface. And I asked her if I could share some of that in pieces with Gage. And she said yes. And that also she would like to bring the 2 boys in together to talk about it. And so I did talk to Gage a little bit to share what the boy was going through. And, you know, once my son knew, his whole demeanor changed. He just couldn't imagine what it would be like at that age to lose his mother. And so when the boys talked, it was a great mediation or conversation. They actually became friends as long as the boy was still there in school. He did transfer to another school. But it was just showing you that when you have one person who cares and understands what a kid is going through, and you can have those conversations, what the outcome is and what it can be. So that's why it's so important to make sure that you know who you can refer to or talk to when these situations come up. So school-based mental health professionals, because of the impact of the pandemic, it's really deepened the need for mental health supports. And we know that prior to the pandemic, mental health issues were, as I always heard, were through the roof. And as a practicing school counselor prior to the pandemic, I totally saw that. I saw students coming in with issues that I had never imagined a high school student could be going through. The things that I would hear or the situations that they would be going through was really very different than when I had started 20 years prior. So add on the pandemic and all of the things going on with that, you definitely have an increase. So what I mentioned at the beginning is these 3 organizations came together, and they came together to come up with, you know, a united front on how we could all work together. We are all on a school campus, and how we could provide supports for mental health needs to students. What we were finding is, and especially at the school that I came from, is as these mental health issues started to come up, counselors were saying, we need more help, we need more help. And so what they did, and it's no fault of anybody's, but they would hire community-based agencies to come onto the campus, which was great support, but there was no definition of their role or how we were supposed to work together. We were just kind of thrown in the same office and said, figure it out. And so, you know, we did, but what it was saying was that maybe our administrators didn't know how to best utilize us or how we could better support our students if we just structured things a little bit differently. So this is a wonderful guide, and there's a link to the document in the slide deck that kind of, it's in a quick, simple document to outline the roles of each of these 3 groups and how they can best support students on campus. Because again, in relation to a community-based agency, your school counselors, your school social workers, your school psychologists know your students. They know your staff. They have relationships already with kids. And so they are the ones that are probably going to be the best support for the student. But not to say that community-based agencies aren't important as well. So this has way more links than you need, but I wanted to provide you with some things that if you were ever curious, like, well, what is the role of a school counselor? What do they do? Because I think, you know, they are just in their office, and we always say eating bonbons with their feet up on the desk. They can go to the bathroom whenever they want. Okay, so there's one perk. However, there are other things that we have a master's degree in and a PPS credential to do to service students. And so there's a lot of great things that you can check out. There's even appropriate and inappropriate duties that define, you know, what the appropriateness of a school counselor's role is on a student's campus. And then we also have resources from our California Association, which includes some resources that are really relevant and recent on behalf of COVID-19. Another thing that a lot of people don't know is that school counselors have 3 domains, and we have standards just like teachers do. So the 3 domains cover academics, career, and social emotional development, which, as you can see, has the bubble of mental health attached to it. So all of these 3 things They do have their seasons. We know as high school counselors, the academic development is very heavy at certain times of the year, as well as career and college development. However, the social and emotional development tends to take up the majority of a school counselor's time. This is another thing that I wanted to share, another resource. MTSS, we adapted it for school counselors, and Trish Hatch, who is kind of like the Oprah of school counseling, she really has done a lot of groundbreaking things for school counselors. And so she came up with the multi-tiered, multi-domain system of supports. And she's added in the 3 domains that I just showed you into the pyramid. So as you can see, what we've tried to have school counselors take a look at is how is their time spent? Are they spending majority of their time in the all, the some, or the few? And how or what services are they providing? When we ask school counselors to put sticky notes on this to showcase where they're spending most of their time, a lot of it is in that social emotional element, and it's at the top in the few, because they're seeing just a few students, but they're spending a lot of time in that area. And we need to find ways to bring it down to the all. And that's where SEL is a big part of that. So this slide, I apologize, it looks like some things are grayed out, but what we've put together is some professional learning series for school counselors that just started last Friday. We have 21 workshops over a course of 5 weeks to help support the work of a school counselor. It's completely free, and it's all put on by professional school counselors. We also have some of our folks at SDCOE leading workshops, as well as some of our administrators. So it's a wonderful way to kind of take a look and see, what things we can still do before school ends and what supports we can provide for our school counselors. And we have put it together by theme. So Mental Health Week will be week 3, where we will touch on those mental health issues. And if you're ever interested, you can click here to register. We welcome anybody to this event. CASC, who is the California Association for School Counselors, is also putting on a mental health week, May 10th through the 14th. And these are some of the workshops that they are putting on as well. All right, and I'm going to hand it over to Anna.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anna Shen, and I'm a project specialist at SDCOE, but I'm also a school social worker. So thank you, Tanya. I am just going to briefly go over the role of the school psychologist. Most of you, I think it was 100% in that poll, have school psychologists at your site. There's a lot of sped law involved in your school sites, and that's the reason why we need to make sure that we have school psychologists employed at our school sites. But they are also guided by professional standards and ethics through the National Association of School Psychologists. They use the model of practice. But school psychologists spend a lot of time on assessment, data collection and analysis, progress monitoring, consultation. They provide academic, mental health, and behavioral interventions, instructional support, SPED services. They're there for crisis intervention, and they do a lot of family and school collaboration. But really, they ultimately want to make sure that students are succeeding academically, socially, behaviorally, and emotionally. So they are your school site mental health professional. Next slide. So role of the school social worker. School social workers are also guided by professional organization standards and ethics. There's not as many school social workers in San Diego County as there are school counselors. Roles are very similar, but also a little bit different. School social workers really have a person and environment approach, a holistic approach, where we are a linkage between the school, the home, and the community. Next slide. So school social workers assist students and families to overcome barriers that interfere with academic success. And again, we spend a lot of time building relationships with the family, the extended family, coaches, any supportive adult in a child's life we get to know. We collaborate with administrators, teachers, counselors, school psychologists to support students. We also are part of your crisis response team. We support the positive school climate. We look at the tiered approach. School social workers do spend a lot of time doing SEL lessons in the classroom or supporting school-wide SEL, but also coaching teachers on SEL. We spend time doing group interventions at the tier 2 level. We also spend time doing individual counseling and crisis intervention at the tier 3 level. School social workers have national SEL standards that really mirror CASEL's SEL standards and competencies. And there's some links here, the useful documents. You can look in your slides to see what those standards are. There's also a document in there that has some sample SEL lessons attached with the school social work standards. And you can reference that document also. I know that this is something that we've covered previously, but it's really important to remind folks that SEL is different than mental health. Mental health refers to a clinically diagnosable condition, typically that we find in the DSM-5. It's a medical condition. And SEL refers to learning competencies, interchangeably that transition into adulthood. Many students can have both of these needs, but some may only have one. So there really is very much a difference between the two. It's important that we also note that just because someone is a school-based mental health professional does not necessarily mean that they're providing mental health treatment, but we are a resource for you to be able to refer students to mental health treatment should the need arise. Next slide. So when would you refer someone to a school-based mental health professional? This list is not exhaustive, and I'm going to preface this with the fact that we are entering May, which is our Mental Health Awareness Month. But we really cannot teach the head of the heart that's broken. It's really hard for students to sit in a classroom and be engaged with the lesson if they have so many other things going on. And that's really where your school mental health professional comes in. So changes in student behavior, they could be withdrawn, tired, falling asleep, their head downs in class, exhibiting anger, violence, mood swings. All of a sudden you're seeing grades drop, a lack of apathy all of a sudden. Visible signs of distress, they're coming to school very sad or crying. If you have knowledge of alcohol or substance abuse, a student's exhibiting anxiety, that could also be eating disorders. A student reporting self-harm or suicidal ideation, this can also show up in class assignments. A lot of times when I was a school social worker, the ELA teacher would bring me sample writings that students would write because they had a concern about some of the things they were writing about. Family stressors, these could be acute, like all of a sudden parent lost a job or a car accident, or this can be a long-term, parents going through a divorce and family is moving. Bullying, like Tanya had mentioned previously with her son, problems with friends or relationships, poor hygiene, sexual behavior, student absences. All of a sudden you notice a student is just not coming to school like they normally would. Unexplained injuries, students coming to school with bruises or things that are happening to them. Parent or friend expresses concerns. That's another form of, hey, I need to reach out to the school mental health professional to see what's going on with the student. And anytime your gut really just tells you that something is wrong. And you as a teacher or an administrator may not necessarily have the time or be able to really help that student in that moment. But the way that you can help is to bring in that school mental health professional. And you can even do that together with the student to kind of do that warm handoff and make sure that they know that you care and that there's people on campus that care about them as well. And I highly encourage you to have your staff trained in youth mental health first aid, which we have those trainings throughout SDCOE. Next slide. It's also important that we look at SEL as a daily routine. What we typically hear, and I've heard this in all my years in working in schools, there's just not enough time. We really need to look at making SEL part of our academic minutes. We have minutes for our academics. We need to make sure that we have SEL embedded in those minutes. We also hear that we don't have a full-time counselor, social worker, or school psychologist. Again, this is every adult on campus. This is all of our responsibility to teach SEL. It can't just rely on one person or one professional to do all this work. We also hear we don't have subs for professional development. Again, that's something that you bring to your stakeholders. You know, how can we make this work? How can we make sure that our staff are being trained? We hear we're already doing a curriculum and the counselor school social worker teaches it. Well, again, SEL is not just a standalone curriculum. It's embedded in everything that we do. So some of the things that we encourage you to do is again, build it into your daily schedule. For elementary, that could be during class meetings, morning announcements. Middle and high school, you can build that within your schedule during advisory time. Every adult can continue doing SEL throughout the day, the week, the month. You can integrate it into content area. You can make it fun and pick a theme. Maybe there is social awareness month and everybody is involved with doing social awareness. You can bring your student voices on board, your ASB, there could be lunchtime activities. There's lots of ways to embed SEL throughout the entire campus. Clubs, organizations, you can make your staff lounge all about SEL or whatever the theme or topic is that month, and just do that community building throughout the school. Next slide. And then again, school-based mental health professionals are not always the best at tracking data and what they do. And the reason for that is there's so much in and out. There's phone calls, there's emails, there's hey, I got this kid as you're walking through the hallway. There's kids knocking on the door. There's their standard caseload, their other duties, meetings. It's sometimes really hard to track that data, but I really encourage you to encourage your school-based mental health professionals to keep track of data. And if you are a school-based mental health professional, to ensure that you are doing that. Keeping track of student referrals for services, student contacts, parent contacts, any SEL lessons you've taught, staff PD, consultation with staff, crisis intervention, any outside referrals that you make, parent workshops, SEL assessments. Your school climate data are a good source for data. It could be a PBIS survey, a check survey, also a school board presentation, parent presentations, communication through newsletters, website, back to school nights, open house nights, your DLAC, your ELAC, your PTA, community members, student voice, just keeping as much data as possible. So then you can go to your stakeholders and say, this is a need. We need SEL on our campus. And here's the reason why. We have all this data to show you that our school-based mental health professionals have been collecting. So if you aren't collecting that data now, I highly encourage you to start, because data speaks to our stakeholders. And next, and back to Tanya.
So a great example of collecting the data and having it be powerful for keeping jobs on a campus was Cajon Valley. In fact, at one of our workshops last week, sharing on the ASCA model and on their SEL implementation, they shared how their teachers and school counselors are working together to make this work. Now they are in year 4, so they have put together quite a program, and they've collected data to where all of the new folks that they've hired, and they have a school counselor at every single school in their district, elementary and middle. And because of the data collected and the playlists that they put out and the work that they've done, they will not lose any jobs. And so I just want to share this 1-minute video clip that explains what this work is.
Using data collected from CVUSD educators and the latest research in social emotional learning, we have shaped a framework of social, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral skills that are necessary for all of our students to be happy, in healthy relationships, and on a path to gainful employment. There are 3 big ideas: emotional fluency, social fluency, and cognitive behavioral fluency. We want children to put into practice skills that will allow them to regulate their emotions, effectively navigate social situations, and engage in behaviors that are in alignment with their goals and move them towards their best possible future selves. There are 9 priority standards and 27 embedded standards. These are actionable skills that can be taught, practiced, and learned. Similar to teaching a child math, we're providing a common language that will give teachers and children a language to discuss social, emotional, and cognitive processes. Similar to teaching a child reading, we're providing opportunities for children to struggle and grow while the teacher fulfills the role of warm demander. Developmentally, children are dependent on adults for survival. That's why the adults in a child's life have such a lasting impact. A teacher who believes in you can change what you believe about yourself. Learning is a vulnerable process. We want each of our children to feel safe enough to take risks in the classroom, ask questions, and push through challenges. All children can learn and grow when they feel seen, loved, and inspired.
So I just love that. They hit on all the points. And even if you think about the teacher that you put, or the special person that you put that you have a memory of that helped you through school in the chat, again, that's what we're trying to do for all students. And one resource that they allowed me to share was this Cajon Valley Union School District SEL lesson plans, in which the teachers and the school counselors really work together. They have a list of when the SEL lesson is to take place, and they do the same lesson across the district at all of their schools. And the school counselors even put together some short tutorial videos to help the teachers with those lessons. So it's a huge collaborative project of how you can do this well with all parties. And so where are we going? And we know that a lot of funding has come down the pipe that we are expecting to support mental health and to support our students through this. And so there's a lot of legislation coming through where LEAs can decide if they would like to use it for staff, if they'd like to use it for bringing on additional resources. So that's coming down, and there's those decisions on how are we going to do it and who are we going to fund. This just came in today, and it's how you can kind of learn how do we spend this money. And so a whole child approach is, of course, what we're looking at. And Assembly Bill 86, Expanding Learning Opportunities Grant Summit, is for all California educators and leaders. And so this is something that you can register to attend. They'll have some keynote speakers and some workshops. And there's a flyer there that you can share with other people about how you can best support this work. But it's definitely a conversation that if you are responsible for SEL or oversee counselors or need more supports from your school-based mental health professionals, it's a conversation you want to be a part of, and you definitely want to be at the table. And then I did want to attach an article that came out last week in Voices of San Diego, where we highlighted this work and how schools are looking at school-based mental health professionals to bring on more on campus. I know my former district is looking at bringing on a counselor for every single school to add one, albeit they're temporary right now, but hopefully, if data proves that it's a necessity and that we need more staff, that they could stay. So there's a lot of conversation going on, and this was a great article just to kind of touch on what was happening here locally. Okay. And then Melissa, is this where you?
Yeah. Okay, so I believe Louise is gonna share. So we just wanted to take a minute after that to think about, do a little reflection. And also, since we have such brilliant people here to share with us, to see if you had any questions right now. We have about a couple minutes for that, about creating roles or anything related to school social workers, school counselors, or school psychologists. Just take a moment. You can type in the chat. You can unmute. So we're a small but friendly group.
I had a question. I have a social worker that's going to come on next year. So we'll have them for a few days each week. We haven't had a social worker before while I've been here. And so the counselors and the school psychologists, and I have a student support person as well. They're just wondering what the role of the social worker will be. And so we're gonna try to get that down pat. I know that might come from the district, but right now we don't have any information on that. So what would you recommend some of the things that social worker would take up? That's pretty difficult when we have so many people, which is a good thing. I just want to make sure that we're not stepping on each other's toes while they're doing all that.
I can chime in and answer that. Hi, Pablo.
Hi.
Well, definitely we want to connect your social worker with our department because we support school social workers across the county. So I'll make sure you have my email. But I want to say that I have worked at a site where we had a school counselor, a school psychologist, a school social worker, a principal, and an assistant principal. And that was the dream team. Everybody had their roles. And I'm assuming that you're bringing on a social worker to help meet some of the mental health needs and the counseling needs on your campus. And that's really going to be their role, is it's like a triage team, you discuss the student or the supports that the student needs, and you decide who's going to wrap their arms around that student and help them. Maybe it's a variety. Maybe the counselor needs to work with them on something. Maybe the social worker needs to work with them on another thing, which is completely okay. but they can provide that individual and group counseling and really provide the support services that the counselor and the school psychologist may not have the time to do, but also helping with SEL as well. But I'll definitely make sure you have my email and we can touch base further. But I think it's a beautiful team, and the fact that you're bringing someone on, you are going to have the dream team. So congratulations.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so I think we're ready to move on and start to bring this, start wrapping this up. Thank you, Tanya and Anna, for your wonderful, wonderful wisdom that you shared with us and the insight how to tie all this together, right? It's how we integrate all of these different practices that usually happen out of sight so that we're not duplicating work and we're supporting each other's work at the site level. You know, I was working with our district level team and thinking about what kind of practices that support wellness exist at a site. And this is not an exhaustive list. This was just our initial thinking. Well, there's SEL on site. There's inside sites, there's restorative practices. There's PBIS. The framework is at some sites as well. And some sites are working on innovative school discipline. And some sites have suicide prevention teams and mental health professionals, right? Also working on campus. So the question is, well, let's name it, right? Because in SEL, if you can name it, you can tame it. Who at your site is working on systemic wellness, right? And just kind of throw that idea out there of how we bring it together and how it works together in an integrated system. You know, and again, just sharing the thinking, how social emotional learning and restorative practices are two sides of the same coin. It's you can't restore what's not there, right? It's the foundation of restorative practices. There's also positive behavior interventions. I learned a lot from my great colleague, Reed Burns, this year about how behavior interventions play a role, right? And we could be doing SEL and RP as universal supports in the classroom. And what happens when you take it to tier 2 and tier 3, right? How do they interact with each other? How can the PBIS framework also support the SEL and RP work that's happening across the site? And ultimately, how they tie into that innovative school discipline plan, right? One that moves away from punitive and works more towards working in tandem to support the tiered responses to discipline and building those relationships, which also goes into the suicide prevention work that really focuses on prevention and intervention and postvention. It's all the same work. I guess it's just how are we working together, and as school leaders and district leaders, how are we creating the crosswalk, or how are we integrating the work together to support each other, right? And the way that this thinking came about was every practice, wellness practice, has its roadmap. I was reflecting on our own work for the county level and at the site level, district level. SEL has a roadmap. We start with district-wide SEL, we support adult SEL, we move to school-wide SEL, and we integrate it with the academics. But as you probe further, PBIS has its roadmap. Restorative practices has its roadmap. Right? They all have their roadmap. Our mental health practitioners have their roadmap. What is the integrated roadmap? What is our integrated wellness plan and how we tie it together? And again, this could look different for every district and every site based on what practices are already there. It's just to ask that question, because ultimately, what can all students say when they're on a campus, right? Because we want to keep that student-centered lens on all these practices we're tying together. My colleague, Jenny Winkler at the National Conflict Resolution Center shared this with me to kind of help gather that perspective. And this is just a starting point, right? Because really it's authentic when it fits into our context. So for example, can our students say that we use restorative practices for learning and building community? For our district, I would frame it, do we use social emotional learning and restorative practices for learning and building community, right? It could be different for you. Everyone greets me and shows me kindness, compassion, and respect. I know who I can talk to if I'm having a rough day. I know who I can go to if I'm struggling in class. And everyone treats me like their own child with love and high expectations. We are reimagining discipline, conflict, and behavior through a restorative social emotional lens. So we're working on our own map on what students should be able to say, and also what adults should be able to say on campus, right? Can an adult say, I know when I need to refer to a mental health professional, or I know when I can refer this to a counselor, and the same for a counselor, Matt, right? I know when I can provide coaching for a student that doesn't require a mental health professional beyond here, So it's just going to break this out for your thinking, and we're going to do a quick breakout uh, just to kind of gather your guys' thinking and bring you guys into the room as well as how you're receiving all this. So I'm going to defer over to Melissa, who's going to help us break out here in a second.
Okay, so what we're going to do in a quick breakout room, we just want to get to know each other a little bit and also kind of discuss, if you'll go back 1, 2, 3 slides. So we have the terminology, 2, 3, yeah, I counted correctly. What are our interrelated wellness practices? And if you go back one more, what does your system look like? What is your systemic wellness practices? To get the best ideas from the best people in the room. So we're going to go into our breakouts, and then we're going to come back for a quick Q&A and close out. So here we go. Wrap up to see if there are any questions and to go over our last, our quick review as we always do at the end.
All right, so our session review. We aim to reflect on the importance of a caring adult for every student. Did we hit that target? I hope so. We examine the role of school-based mental health professionals and implementation in school-wide SEL. Big kudos to our school-based mental health professionals, Tanya and Anna, for their amazing presentation and wealth of knowledge. And thank you for being able to, Anna, support districts in real time. That's what this session is about, is being able to access supports immediately. So thank you for that. And then review the interrelation and integration of wellness practices and supports. We've heard all of the acronyms, PBIS, RP, SEL, mental health and wellness. So it's really our goal to make it as doable as possible for you all to see the alignment and be able to lift the work with fidelity so that those supports can authentically get to our young people.
So thank you all. It is 4:30, so we will hopefully see you next week. The slides and the video will be posted most likely tomorrow. And feel free to reach out with any questions or further support. Thank you all.